welcome to this episode of the At Sea podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts, and this is your co-host, Dan Portnoy. Hey, Dan.
Hello. Hello there. Thanks for having me again.
Over and over. We are marching through the book Sacred Strides, chapter by chapter, talking about the ins and the outs and the things behind the chapters. And we're at chapter 11, 3 or 4 more to go. Dan, you read this chapter beforehand. What'd you see? What'd you think? What's your brain?
A lot of stuff here. So chapter 11, being a front runner or true compassion and learning to lead with love. So the fun part, I think, is where you start. We start way back in the age before time, spring 2000.
real
just
story.
after the late 1900s.
Yep.
If you really want to feel old, say the late 1900s. I graduated high school in the late 1900s.
Yep.
The early 1990s.
Yeah. I got a top hat and like a monocle.
Easily a monocle, easily, and a manservant. I don't know why, but you do. That's his name. Chauncey.
Let's roll.
Chauncey Billings. Chauncey, give me my Sherpa. I don't know. So there you were. You were opening act for a band, and then what I think is really funny in your story here. So I guess why don't you bring us through the first little bit here of telling us what it was like to as you're kind of transitioning, right? In this point, you're going from young life to full-time musician.
Yep.
And you've hit the road. And you're talking about the break that would happen in the middle of a show. So what was happening?
Yeah, so it's all transitions. So I was young life guy, youth minister guy, and then I was musician guy, and then I was like the person who's on the tour who also talks. And because I was the guy on the tour who also talks, I got to talk about things that matter. And this is Cornerstone, which used to be like a super great festival in Peoria, Illinois.
Yes.
And the reason I got to play at this cool kid festival was because I was a person in the middle of things. Like, I was a musician, so they thought, like, hey, artist guy. And I also talked, so they thought, hey, talk guy. And I ended up being the main stage MC at Cornerstone in 2000 or the summer before. And my responsibility is to like MC the transitions between bands, and then once in a while stop and ask people if they would sponsor kids with compassion and get them out of poverty. That's the whole job. And I was not qualified for any of it, really.
Yeah, so nothing like, trying to earn your stripes in front of a crowd of... were you on main stage or side stage?
Well, the MC gig was main stage. So all my gigs...
main stage is what, 35,000 people or something?
It was massive. No, all my gigs were like 30 people, like 30 kids.
Yeah.
Like, oh, acoustic guy. And then the main stage was like this massive crowd. And I was supposed to walk out and transition between bands.
Right.
And then like stop the crowd at some point and say like, hey, I have a band coming up that you came to see. But before that,
right.
Here's the thing. And I was so bad at the job. I was so bad at it. They hated me. They hated me.
I just love that because I remember being that guy sometimes, like sitting there, and then it's like, okay, Blindside just destroyed the stage. Next up is I don't know, just like a big metal band, like I can't think of who, like with timpani. I'm trying to think of who I saw there with I don't know, just a giant metal band. And so you're just like, oh my gosh, this is getting crazy. And then it'd be like, hey guys, before we get started.
Yep. Totally me.
Just being like, really? How long is this going to be?
So the headliner that night was actually Under Oath. Do you remember Under Oath?
Yes, I definitely remember Under Oath.
Oh, and before them was a band called Norma Jean, and Norma Jean at the time was like one of my favorite bands. I'd seen them multiple times. Huge fan. So my job was to transition between Family Force 5, which was this like funk metal,
Right.
like hardcore, goofy, like like balloons and hardcore band, and Norma Jean, which was like screamo core, I've lost everything I care about, and everything is sad band. And my job was to go between them, these two bands, and be like, hey, there are kids in poverty that need your help. That was my job. Right. It was so I get on the stage and I just bomb. 100% bomb. I don't know who makes that transition. Well, I do. But anyways, I didn't kill in the right way. I killed in the wrong way.
Here's a moment. You killed all right.
Here's a moment. Can you kill it? Yes, I can. It is dead.
It's super dead.
I killed it. So I super dropped the ball, and they're throwing things at me.
So now the crowd has turned violent against you.
No joke. Like sandwiches. There were like, and then this is from the book. At some point, people are actually throwing coins. They're throwing coins at me, and someone hits me in the face with like $1-ish.
$1.
Well, like a handful of coins.
So it wasn't like still in the wrapper and then they just
no.
It was
like someone near enough has like a handful of quarters, and I'm hit in the face with a handful of quarters. I'm bleeding from my forehead.
Oh wow.
And I think what I say at the time was, so you're willing to throw, this much money at me to stop me from talking, but you won't throw that much money at some kid dying in poverty. Which is like, I'm like the king of guilt trips.
Yeah, it's like you're really winning friends and influencing people here.
Oh, God. It was a terrible moment for me. So thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah. Okay, well, good. Yeah, so there you were, heaping tons of guilt on a group that was already unhappy to see you.
Yes.
And so that's and then that doesn't go over well with the other group who says you can't do that, man.
No.
You can't.
No, the folks who'd hired me were there to win actual people to their actual cause. And I was so into what I was doing, and I was so into my feelings about it. Like I was caught, obviously I'm caught up in like the fact that like kids are throwing things at me, that I lose sight of the mission, and I get about my feelings, and I'm yelling and screaming at kids for throwing things at my face.
This sounds terrible. I'm so glad it wasn't me. Only because I'm like, I can like feel it, and it's really like, oh, it's the bad sweats.
Yeah. So the thing that happened later on that night was, I watched this guy who is a friend of mine now named Jamie, who he came out between Norma Jean and Under Oath. He had like a 10-minute, maybe 5-minute slot. And Jamie walked out on the edge of the stage, and he started talking to these kids. And he wasn't trying to sell them on something. He was like, hey, I know you're hurting, or something along those lines. Like, he walked out, and the first thing he said was about how they were feeling. And he met them in, like, whatever was happening for them. And what shocked me into awareness was I was on the edge of the stage thinking, like, here's the thing I know and think is important. And I want this crowd of people to get on board with what I know and think is important. And Jamie walked to the edge of the stage and was like, hey, let me meet you in what you think and know is important, which is how you're experiencing your own life. And I was shocked into an awareness of the difference between what I was trying to do and what folks like Jamie are actually doing. But if I'm going to meet an audience, if I'm going to meet people with my work, I have to be thinking about where they are instead of where I want them to get. That was revelatory for me. Like, for me, empathy was, here's stuff I know is wrong with the world. You can fix it. Let's go. For Jamie, empathy was, I know you are hurting and you have your own life. Let's start here and then go wherever we go from here. I was scandalized and formed by that moment. So that's this chapter.
Yeah. Well, that has to be. It is very interesting because, and obviously Jamie is gifted at that. But I just think it's really funny for me now, knowing you now, thinking about you doing like the youth pastor guilt thing, because that actually is really far from where you are or far from anything I've ever known. So that's just really funny. Because I don't know if you had a youth pastor that like tried to constantly like Jesus juke it, like whatever you were doing. There was a Jesus juke. Like, guys, I know that we're enjoying bowling, but this bowling ball is kind of how Jesus destroys our sin. And the bowling balls are the sin in our life. And you're like, are you serious right now? I'm just trying to bowl, man.
I never
Or
had
like
that.
whatever. It just like, you didn't have anything like that?
No, I didn't have the guy.
Oh, lucky.
I know.
Lucky.
No, I was that guy.
So, yeah. But obviously
became
not very
him.
long.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just embodied him, just for a brief moment in front of thousands of people. So what is it that after that? I think it's interesting because you said this is why they didn't respond to my invitation. That you started talking about like that you weren't really loving on them. You were coming with a pitch.
So yeah, because the pivot point here for me is my interest and desire to do good things in the world can't come at the cost of other people becoming pieces of machinery. So if the problem with poverty, this is true, if the problem with poverty is that there's the whole world of mechanism that dehumanizes folks, I can't dehumanize other folks to prop up other people. Like if I play the game of these people are suffering, so I'm gonna dehumanize you, and get you to become like you're the cash cow that gets me to like fund this project I'm doing. I'm just passing on the same grossness to another populace of people. Whereas, like belovedness says, if you want this, if you want to be part of the redemption of the world, then let's tap into your desire. Let's tap into your like well-being. Let's tap into you wanting to be whole, and let's actually do it on that level, as opposed to like, hey, like this is more important than what you're feeling right now. That was revelatory for me.
Yeah. So what was the next step for you?
Next step came when I started doing tours on my own, and I started doing just me and a mic and advocating. I knew that the folks in front of me were there because they came to my shows, all 20 of them per night. They came to my shows because there were things in their lives that they were trying to work out. And that them becoming whole was why they were there. And if there were things beyond what was happening in their life that added to their wholeness, that would make like mission sustainable. But I'm not trying to sell them on something that's bigger and more important than them. So I stopped being a salesman and started actually trying to care for the folks in front of me And if I could care for them by like tapping them into missions or ideas or projects that were like large scale, bigger than their lives, then great. But I didn't want to make people instruments of some larger mission. That was the next step. Is like, if I'm going to do what I do and do it well for the folks who care about me, I actually have to care about them and make whatever they do from the standpoint of like generosity and care about their wholeness rather than like some sort of like even a redemptive bottom line. That was the next step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a weird thing to go from I had a mentor that would talk about raising money, and he had to raise a whole lot of it all the time. And he would talk about how like, because I'd be like, oh, I don't want to ask people for money. It feels weird, you know. And he's like, that actually you're just providing an opportunity for them to do a thing that it doesn't, whether it works or not is not you, and it's not personal if they say no. And like, you know, it's so very helpful with that. And at the time it was a pretty big adjustment for me, because I thought I was a good salesman, like coming from the you know, doing corporate stuff, and then going, okay, wait a minute, this is, and for him to really phrase it like, no, if somebody, and I just thought about it like if it was someone coming to me and saying, hey, so I'm doing this thing, do you want to be a part of it or not? Like, it's just a quick choice, and it isn't whether like these Cutco knives can cut through a rope and a penny at the same time. It's more like, okay, do I have the cash for it, and is it worth is this something that I think is worthwhile? Much more than taking it as some sort of personal affront. But
the way I write it in the book, I said advocacy doesn't begin with God. The idea that God so dearly loves people living in poverty that he's willing to use people of means to solve the problem of poverty. That's a sad mechanical way of thinking about people. At its root, poverty erodes and strips away the essential value of human life. It's not just that you don't have access to things that might bring you health and joy. It's that poverty says you're not worthy of these things that bring you life. Otherwise, you'd have them. And there I was, challenging the basic humanity of the people in front of me in order to convince them to join the movement. I didn't love the people in front of me in the crowd that day. I didn't actually care about them, and they could feel it. And more than that, and more than anything else, this is why they didn't respond to my invitation. In other words, like, if the global invitation, if the kingdom invitation is wholeness and the renewal of all things, then that's what I'm actually inviting people into, and not like you are a piece of church or redemptive machinery that achieves goals that are bigger and higher and better than what you're wanting to do with your life.
Yeah, that doesn't sound fun. Who's signing up for that? Nobody.
Guilty, sad people.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Those easily manipulated, I guess. I don't know.
True story.
Yeah. So here you get really, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, you get a little preachy in this chapter.
Yeah. I do.
Because you really do. I don't necessarily think of that in a bad way, but it's one of those things that like, he really got the Bible out for this one.
Yeah. The next part of the chapter is I get into, where is it? It's in Matthew. Yes.
Yep.
Jesus has these cats that are following around for, at this point, like a year or so, more than. And this is, for Christians, this is like, they call this the moment of Transfiguration. And in the Gospel of Matthew, this verse happens, or this moment happens, recorded this way. Like, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white like the light. Then Jesus appeared before them with Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. So Jesus takes these people up on these like like core friends of his up on this mountain, and they have this revelation moment, and they freak out, and Peter says, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I'll put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. So Peter has this moment where like, this is the thing that's important, and I want to make a home here, so I'm like close to what's important. While Jesus is still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud says, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I'm well pleased. Listen to him." When they heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." And then when they looked up, they saw no one but Jesus. So I write this in the chapter. After seeing what I'd seen with regards to poverty and like kids living in poverty, I'd experienced what I'd experienced, and I felt a lot like Peter. Lord, it's good for us to be here. And if you wish, I'll put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. In other words, this seems important and urgent. I'd like to build something for it. Like when I saw something important, like Peter, I was like, hey, this is the thing that's important to you, so I'm going to make my home here. That's not a bad impulse, this is what I write. In fact, it's a good one. But like Peter, I'd missed the same thing. I don't think God is trying to get a wow out of Peter. I don't think God was trying to convince Peter to get into work because of how serious God is about God's work. If I'm reading the moment right, God was inviting Peter to love the way Jesus loved. That's why the moment Peter chimed in with his premature and urgent reaction, God says, "This is my son whom I love. With him I'm well pleased. Listen to him." The invitation is, I love, and therefore I listen. Long story short, if I'm not tapping into the actual love of people where it actually exists, I'm trying to like manipulate people into even good actions. If it's not rooted in like what I'm actually desiring, I won't stick with it. It won't be about my formation, and I won't keep doing it. If it's about like, this is an urgent thing, this is important, and so stop everything that matters to you in order to get this thing done, I'm just one more piece of machinery trying to get people to move from this machine to this machine. What I wanted to do after this moment was I want to tap into people's actual desires. Like what actually makes you feel alive? What do you actually love about the world, about God, about people? And how do we move you to a place where like the things you love about the world, about God, about the people who live in it, that's like the engine of your generosity, of your charity, that it doesn't matter like so much like what's important in some ethereal mathematical way. How do we get you from like what's important to you in the core of you to generous, responsive, regenerative action in the world? Like that's what I wanted to do after this moment.
So what did you do?
Well, I changed the way I advocate.
So it didn't start with, you didn't lead with the guilt question?
No, man, like I love what Compassion does, and I love what World Vision does, and I love what IJM does, and what Blood Water does, and I love what Charity Water does. And where we miss when it comes to advocacy is when we try to tap into the urgency of our mission and help and try to get folks to like believe that what's happening with us or what we're doing is actually more important than what people are feeling. And instead, like tap into what people are feeling and how they're experiencing their lives, and then build a bridge from like what's important to you and what's vital to you, and build a bridge from there to like, this is similar to or like commensurate with like the global movement towards redemption and wholeness. If I don't care about something in the roots of me, I won't do it long term.
Right.
I can't convince myself that something's more important than what I feel. That's actually real about human psychology. If it's just what I feel, I'll insulate and I'll just kind of stick with what I feel. But if I can tap into like, this is how you're feeling about your life and how you're experiencing your life, and this is commensurate with or like attached to what's happening in the world, that's sustainable. So I've changed the way I advocate, even with regards to poverty, to make it about like, if it's not about your wholeness as a person and that your wholeness is tied to someone else's wholeness, then yeah, we're not really doing the actual work. We're just doing more machinery.
Mm-hmm. It's just different looking machinery.
But it's still machinery, and it still dehumanizes people.
So it is funny, though, that with when it comes to some of these other charities that you're talking about that are moving with nonprofit, working with people in poverty, et cetera, how much it is like how the pitch first just it doesn't work. It just doesn't. It doesn't work, and it's really funny to me that was even a thing for as long as it's been. That it's so much more about like who are you? What's going on with you? And I like it always makes me think of Charity Water, because I do think they do it so well. I think that Scott and his wife are just killing it in terms of like, hi, this is what I'm doing. Who are you? Yeah, instead of like, hi, they introduce themselves. This is what we got going on. Blah 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 blah. But then it's literally like, so what are you doing? What are you about? What is that? Instead of it be making it some sort of huge thing, it's actually such a simple back and forth, and I think it's not easy. That is not an easy thing to do. So I think it's very, very targeted. Like it's so intentional, and they've thought through so many things, and I think that's a great thing. So with your, I mean, now have you been back to, is it Quito? Is that where you went?
Mm-hmm.
Ecuador. Have you been to any other places since that?
Yeah, I was in Uganda and Kenya and then India since then.
And has that all informed those pitches now?
Yeah. Again, like I recognize that the machinery of productivity and like the goals centered drive that dehumanizes people actually kind of misses the point of actual advocacy. And so if I'm going to meet people, I don't want to meet kids living in like terrible situations and then make them an instrument of my storytelling so that I can get people to like make a decision to sponsor kids. What I want to do is connect humans with humans.
Right.
Because that's long-term sustainable, which means I have to see folks as human, which means I have to live at a different pace, and I have to stop making instruments of either like a group of folks who have or a group of folks who don't have. That the advocacy model that doesn't work is one in which these kids don't have things that we want them to have. So I'm going to take their stories, I'm going to squash them down into these dehumanized forms so that I can tell stories to people who do have things, and then dehumanize them and like make them about like what they have. So I'm gonna connect like this lack with this have, and now it's just math, and I connect it, as opposed to like these are people with lives in complexity, and these are people with lives in complexity, and I want to forge this connection and actually make the connection piece, because that's the long term, and that's how poverty gets solved. That's also how like community develops, and that's how the kingdom gets established.
That's great. That's great. We're not puzzle pieces. You can't just slap some together.
True.
Cool. That's what I got.
Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of the At Sea Podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts. This is Dan Portnoy, who is the producer of the At Sea Podcast and the co-host of this series. If you like this and the stories in it, you can jump to heartsandmindsbooks.com and pick up the book from Byron, and or go to Amazon and search Sacred Strides and grab it from the clickety-click. What was the phrase? Clickety-click, whatever. Anyways, you can pick up Sacred Strides wherever you want to, and we will be there.
Yeah, and it was #1 this week.
In rights and something along the lines. It was rights and...
It was very interesting.
It was,
Rights.
In the subcategory
Ceremonies.
that exists, and it was, rights and ceremonies, that it was.
Yes. Wild. Well, peace out.
Peace out.